Good evening and welcome to the October General Meeting of the Montgomery County Civic Federation. My name is Cheryl Gannon and I'm the president. We will begin as always with our routine business. First is approval of the agenda, which was published on page 2 of the newsletter online. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Are there any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes of the September general membership meeting, which were printed on page 7 of the newsletter. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say
Aye.
nay. Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. Next is the treasurer's report. Jerry Garson is our treasurer. Go ahead, Jerry.
We operate on a fiscal year beginning July 1, 2025 through October 13th, 2025. We've collected $1,060 of membership dues, and we've had expenses of $481, giving us a net income of $579. Our current bank balance is $6,266. If there are any questions, please let me know.
I will now call on Joyce Glads, who's going to introduce our speaker tonight.
Okay, I am unmuted. Our guest speaker this evening is Amanda Farber, who will explain to us the various county laws regarding tree protection. Amanda is co-chair of Conservation Montgomery and a member of its advocacy committee. She was involved in the 2023 amendments to the county forest conservation law, as well as efforts to update the tree replacement fee associated with the tree canopy and roadside tree protection laws. Just as an aside, those payments were incredibly low until Amanda got into the picture. She's also the president of the East Bethesda Citizens Association. Many of us are familiar with Amanda's community involvement in the development of the Bethesda Downtown Plan and, after adoption of the plan, its implementation as a member of the plan's Implementation Advisory Committee, of which she is currently co-chair. And in full disclosure, I'm a member and Amanda does a fantastic job with the IAC. And she's known through her numerous other civic and community activities. Thank you and welcome, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Joyce, for that great introduction. And I'm so excited to be here, and thank you, Civic Fed, for hosting me. And I feel like there's a really nice relationship between the Civic Fed and Conservation Montgomery. So I'm pleased to also be here on behalf of Conservation Montgomery. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. So just give me one sec. And here we go. How's that look for everyone?
Great.
Okay. So this is, I get a lot of questions about our tree laws here in the county. And so I've given this presentation before for the Bannockburn Civic Federation, but I updated it a little bit with some new information. And because we're going to be talking a little bit more countywide. But first, just some quick information about Conservation Montgomery. We are a nonprofit formed in 2010. I have the former chair of Conservation Montgomery and a founder who's on the call as well. Karen Madsen is here. So thank you, Karen, for being here tonight. We partner with other organizations in Montgomery County and beyond. Our activities include advocacy for legislation, providing testimony, public outreach. We offer a Home Tree Care 101 class, which maybe some of you have taken, which is just wonderful, where we will bring an arborist out to your community for approximately 2 hours, and they will answer lots of your questions about basically anything and everything about trees and tree care. We offer a big tree tour with Joe Howard, which is very popular. And recently, and this is where I really have to give Karen Madsen a huge shout out, because she was really the driving force behind developing a guide based on our Home Tree Care 101 classes. And it's available, we have it in print, and it's in some of our Montgomery County public libraries. And it's also in website form, and there's a digital book. So lots of ways to access that information. Okay, just taking a quick step back. I think folks know a lot of this information, but we think of trees as being critical infrastructure, right? They're not necessarily optional. They're critical. And I know one of the things Karen likes to say is that trees are the workhorses of the environment. They really serve many, many functions, from cleaner air to reducing runoff, cooler temperatures, protecting biodiversity. And we can see real differences in places where we have trees and where we don't have trees. Here's one example. So here's a street near downtown Bethesda where you can see an example of canopy loss. And this is between 2016 and now. So over the course of these years, we know it takes decades to grow a healthy, mature tree canopy. And we also know that we can lose that in a short period of time. And then it'll take many more decades to regrow it. So there is an article in the publication Strong Towns. It's almost 10 years old now, but it's one of my favorite articles because it's called The Magic of Tree-Lined Streets. And it really emphasizes all the reasons that trees are important for communities. And it also really focuses on the importance of trees for walking and biking. So here you can see here, which block would you rather walk up, especially when it's 90 degrees out in the summer. And before I go on, I should just add that all of these references that I make in this presentation, I'm going to send out in a packet so that you all have the links and the resources and a link to the presentation as well. So all that information will be there. But okay, so speaking of walking on a 90-degree day, Montgomery County did an urban heat island mitigation study back in 2022 to just look at where was it hottest throughout the county. And no surprise, areas with greater tree canopy stayed cooler at all hours, and areas without were hotter. But if you sort of zoom in, you can see the difference on just one street. So these were FLIR images that I took, just showing, for example, that here's a summer day and you have asphalt that is 90 degrees in the shade, and you have asphalt that's almost 140 degrees where there is no shade. So a very significant difference in the heat and the heat impacts from that. So taking sort of a bigger step back, looking at tree canopy in Maryland and Montgomery County, and this is going to lead up to, why we need tree laws, why we need to strengthen our tree laws, and what you can do as individuals and within your organizations. The University of Maryland did a really excellent study and report on forest cover and tree canopy in Maryland. And they looked at many different counties, actually all the different counties. And this was done back in November 2022. And what it found was that all the regions but Central Maryland, and we're considered Central Maryland in Washington, DC suburbs, that all the regions but Central Maryland experienced a net gain in tree canopy that was outside of what was considered a forest, but that there was still this forest fragmentation going on. Right here in Central Maryland, we were the only region that experienced both a loss of tree canopy outside and within forests. And the distribution of tree canopy loss was really apparent in two counties. Montgomery County and Prince George's County accounted for more than 50% of the state's total tree canopy loss. And this is between the years of 2014 and 2018. So pretty significant. And this report goes into specifics about the different counties and looking at that. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I just want to show you an example of some of the data that's in that report. And you can see the big differences here, just the sort of change in area for the different counties of net forest gain and loss and net tree canopy gain and loss. And it also looked at why this was happening. And here in Montgomery County, a lot of the change was associated with development. It also looked at just the tree canopy outside a forest that was converted to other land use, because tree canopy loss, it's not always just development. It could be for agriculture, it could be water, it could be wetlands. But in the case of Montgomery County, it was very significantly attributed to developed land. And if we zoom in even further, there are some tools that can help folks sort of drill down into your neighborhoods, into your central business districts, and look at the tree canopy like in your backyard. So Montgomery Planning, well, they used to offer these two different programs that were related. One was this Growing Green Communities story map, which is over here. It's like on the right side of your screen. It lists all the different CBDs, the central business districts in the county. It is still actually available to look at. So you can pull it up and look at the different data for the different areas. This example is Friendship Heights, and it shows you the tree canopy change over time. You have 2009, 2014, 2018. And then what happens is in 2021, they started to use different technology to get the data. So you cannot directly compare the years prior to 2020 with the years post 2020. So you'll see that it might look like there was a slight increase in tree canopy starting in 2021, between 2018 and 2021 in this particular area, but you actually cannot compare those two directly. The difference can be attributed to the difference in technology being used. So only going forward, as we get more data, will it be able to be directly compared to the 2021. Then over here on this side, they also had a tool called the Tree Canopy Explorer, which would, where you could really select a very specific part of your neighborhood, and you could define the boundaries and look at what was happening with the tree canopy over time. This particular program the software is no longer supported. So I've had people come and ask me about how they're able to go in and look at that, and it's not available. But planning has now put up a new program on the MC Atlas website, which some folks might be familiar with. If you're not, there's all sorts of data that you can look at through the MC Atlas website. So and it can be very fun to play around with and and see what information you can pull from it. But this is the new location where the data is stored. Looking at downtown Silver Spring, I just picked this for example. You can go in and define the area that you want to look at. So here I defined downtown Silver Spring, and it'll tell you that back in 2009, the tree canopy was approximately 17% for downtown Silver Spring. I think that these are not always exact, but it's pretty low. That's a pretty low canopy. Then it dropped in 2018, it was down to 14%. So you see a decrease. And then and then you have to keep scrolling down, which is why there's these two different slides. Then in 2020, it was at 16%. So not really a noticeable increase in tree canopy, and still tracking pretty low for an area. And so that's where our laws come in. We do have three main tree laws in the county. And they do help protect, preserve, and replant trees, but they could also continue to be strengthened because we're seeing too many places in the county that have either lost tree canopy or that is simply not gaining tree canopy. So I'm going to run through these and focus more on two of them. But I'll pull this up. The forest conservation law generally applies to properties that are 40,000 square feet or larger. And it applies when there's a sediment control permit that has been pulled or when subdivision occurs. It does not apply to projects where there's not a sediment control permit or where there's not subdivision. Certain projects can apply for exemptions. And again, I'm going to send out a whole chart which has all this information so you can figure out which law might apply to a certain situation. But in this case, you have to have a forest conservation plan. And you submit that forest conservation plan, and it identifies what trees are present on the property. And then there's a calculation done. And Montgomery Planning is the main agency that's involved with this tree law, the forest conservation law. There is a whole calculation done looking at the land use, looking at the current trees on the property, looking at what the requirements are. And it's determined, and you can see this on site plans, you can see this if you pull up the forest conservation law plans, you can see how much is required through this calculation that Montgomery Planning does. And to meet those requirements, there's a number of different ways that a property owner or a developer can meet that. And it can either be replanting on site, replanting off-site, using a forest conservation bank, or paying a fee in lieu. And it really is dependent on the specific property. There's not one blanket way to be able to figure out like exactly how much is going to be required in terms of mitigation. It's very much property by property and specific circumstances of those properties. See what else. The Montgomery Planning does revisit the rates for the fee in lieu for that, and some of that money goes towards replanting programs, including Reforest Montgomery, which is a program run through planning and that where they replant in the ag reserve. Or I said, did I say Reforest Montgomery? Yeah, Reforest Montgomery. Sorry, a lot of the names of these programs are similar, and so that's one specific law. I want to delve into these other ones because they're a little bit more applicable to infill development and what we all see sort of day to day going on in our neighborhoods and around the county. So the next one is the tree canopy law. So the tree canopy law applies generally to public or private land, again, where there's a sediment control permit required. It does not apply to the Parks Department, though. And it requires property owners to either replant new canopy trees or to pay a fee in lieu during the redevelopment or construction on their property that has required a sediment control permit. So the key here is that the property that receives that sediment control permit may have had no trees on it, or it may have had lots of trees on it, as long as it hasn't met that forest conservation threshold. And regardless of the existing trees on the property or no existing trees on the property, this law requires that there be either some form of replanting or of payment. And it starts at 5,000 square feet for a sediment control permit. And I'm going to forward to this and then go back. And the number of shade trees that are required depends on the size of that sediment control permit. So you can see here, if you have a disturbance for a sediment control permit for up to 6,000 feet, you're going to be required to replant 3 shade trees. Now, you or the developer or whoever has pulled that sediment control permit can choose to replant all 3, can choose to replant 1 and pay for the other 2, or can choose to pay for all of them. The answer is on this slide, but anyone want to guess what happens most of the time? Do you think that trees are getting planted, or do you think trees are getting paid for?
They just pay the fee.
They're just, yes, by a lot. So this is from the Tree Montgomery report. And Tree Montgomery is the replanting program that is associated with the tree canopy law. And they looked back at the data from 2014 to 2024. So you have 10 years of data. And you can see that, let's, for example, look at the 6,000 to 8,000 square foot properties where there was a sediment control permit pulled for that amount of land. So that would have required 6 shade trees to be replanted on the property or paid for. You can see that for that category, there would have been 2,705 trees required as mitigation. The number of trees that were planted were 57 by the applicants. The number of trees for which fees were paid, 2,648. So a really, really big spread there. So Tree Montgomery then comes around, and it's a great program. It offers shade trees to residents and they also do some planting on school grounds, that request it though. These trees don't necessarily go back to where the sediment control permits came from. And they have some data here, you can see in the graph, where most of the sediment control permits are coming from, where most of the fees are coming from, and then you can see where trees are being planted through this program. And I'm going to send the report out so folks can look through the whole thing. Again, it's a great program, but you can see that there's a bit of a disconnect between trees that are getting planted by applicants and trees that are getting paid for. And then there's a difference in where the fees are coming from and where the trees are getting planted. Tree Montgomery tries to balance as much as they can. They try to get trees back into areas that they know where the tree canopy has been hit hard. They try to make it equitable across the county for where they know greater tree canopy is needed. But it doesn't always work out to be an exact equation or science. So that is the tree canopy law. And one thing yet, what Joyce mentioned is that for the 10 years of this program, and also this will also apply to the roadside tree protection law, which we're going to get into next, the fees that were paid into the programs for the trees. So actually, let me go back to this. Let me go to this slide. The fees that were paid were at $250 a tree. For 10 years, they never increased the cost, despite the fact that the cost of the trees being planted was increasing. And so the council, after begging and pleading by many residents and organizations, agreed to look at updating those fees. So they finally increased them. The current fee for the tree canopy law is now $470 a tree. So it went from $250 to $470, which sounds like a lot, but they had not increased it for 10 years. And that's how much it costs for these high quality trees that they're planting. And then they also allowed for there to be increases for inflation going forward, so that 10 years from now we're not looking back and saying, okay, we didn't increase the fee enough. There will be a steady increase now that will occur automatically. And the same thing, so for the roadside tree protection law, so a permit is required for any trimming, cutting, or stump removal in the right-of-way of a public county road. So here we're talking about county roads, not state roads. There's a tree protection plan or replacement plan that's required for trees in the right-of-way impacted by disturbance. The law requires that one tree be planted back into the right-of-way at or near the location of the tree being removed, and that a fee be paid for the planting of 2 additional trees, unless the requirement is waived because of a dead tree or a tree that's hazardous. This fee is tied to a bond, and it used to be collected at $250. Now it's collected at $450. And it goes back into the DOT tree planting fund. And it may only be used to plant trees in the right-of-way of a public road in the county. And there's also specific requirements in terms of species and spacing and proximity to utilities. But you'll notice when I said something, about the requirements, it might not be what you actually observe on the ground, which is that a tree is required to be replaced and that 2 additional trees must be paid for. So what happens a lot is a tree will be removed, and again, either for different reasons, either they'll just pay back in for all 3 trees, or because of spacing, stump issues, new utilities for different projects, they don't always replant all the trees where they were taken out. And it really requires residents to stay on top, or whoever's involved, to stay on top of insisting that trees get replanted back in the general area where they were removed in terms of the street tree law. So, Karen, I see you nodding your head there. Do you have a comment on that? Oh, you're muted.
I'm nodding because I just think you're nailing it and you're doing a really good job of explaining this, and it's very complicated. And I'm sure we'll have some questions when you finish.
Yeah, it is very complicated. And again, I'm going to send out a packet that has all of this laid out in writing so that you can read through. And there's so many different circumstances and situations with trees. So there's specific considerations for, every place in the county, basically. But these are sort of the more general requirements.
I'll just add that these laws are what they are today. I mean, there's room for improvement on them. There's no question. But these laws exist, and they are what they are because of citizen input. People were just outraged to see so many trees go down for development in particular. And this was very much citizen driven.
And by citizen driven, Karen was one of the driving forces behind these laws. I mean, she put blood, sweat, and tears into these laws so that we could have the tree canopy that we have now. Because I can only imagine we would be so much worse off without the laws. So I do want to give a acknowledgement to Karen for that. She's right. They're not perfect, but they are, they're doing a lot to, especially replant trees in the county.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see here. And that's sort of a good segue to this, which it often takes a lot of work for what's considered to be these little tree law wins, but they are so, so important. So everything from increasing the fees in order to keep pace with the actual cost, to updating some of the laws, which these laws have been updated at various times over the last 10 years. Recently, the planning board and council looked at achieving something called a no net loss of forest under the forest conservation law. And folks may have heard that headline, okay, no net loss of forest. But what's important to know is that while it was an improvement and it was moving towards a no net loss of forest, is moving towards a no net loss of forest under the law, not under all forest, not under the whole county, not under all properties, not under all forests, but under properties impacted by that particular law. So again, better, definitely improvement on the existing law, but more to be done. Also, in terms of citizen involvement, I wanted to highlight this because this is an issue that comes up a lot, which is trees and sidewalks. And sometimes there can be a real conflict between the two, but there's also creative ways of working, of the county and residents and advocates working together for a better outcome. And there was a great example in 2023 in the Wilburn Acres community where DOT initially came in and was going to remove a majority of trees in the area of roadside trees in order to install sidewalks. And this is a very suburban neighborhood. There's definitely some space to move around there. And a really, like, an incredible resident there spoke up and said, I think there's got to be a better way. We want to have sidewalks, but we also want to have trees. You should not be pitting one against the other. Is there a way to look at doing a better tree protection plan for some of the trees? Is there a way at looking at being creative?
Are you okay about eating over there?
Oh, is everything okay?
It's fine.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. And so this resident asked DOT for all the information for their tree protection plans, for their replanting plans, and was able to form a case that a significant number of the tree removals were going to be unnecessary. That if DOT was just willing to make some adjustments and be creative in some areas, they would be able to save a majority of the trees in that neighborhood. And this resident stayed on top of them for the entirety of the project and documented it and took pictures and took notes. And when things weren't going right, he contacted them, and he did a great job. But what he did is he proved that there is a better way to do some of these projects. And he also proved that it was financially not going to cost any more for them to do it in a more creative, reasonable way. So he ended up writing a playbook for other residents going through, and other neighborhoods going through similar situations, which I'm going to refer to in a little bit, but also which I will forward as part of the packet, because that question comes up a lot. And here on this slide are just some other examples where the initial impulse to remove a tree was not necessarily the most creative solution, and other solutions were found in order to save the trees and allow for sidewalks, which are they're both critical infrastructure. All right, what you can do. I think this group is pretty well versed on a lot of things that you can do, but the programs, DOT's street tree planting program, the Tree Montgomery program, spreading the word about those to your neighbors is important, because they rely on that to get the word out. we've got preventing young trees from becoming deer food. We see that a lot in a lot of our areas. Structurally pruning trees. That's something that's covered in our Conservation Montgomery Home Tree Care 101 class and is also in the booklet, teaching people how to do that and also when to call a licensed arborist to help out. Removing invasive species that choke trees. Sometimes that can be done on an individual basis, sometimes joining a group such as Weed Warriors, or sometimes having some of the programs like parks come in and work on that. Having a Home Tree Care 101 class is a great way to educate neighbors about planting trees and tree care, and just staying engaged with all the levels of government, because we have the tree and forest laws at our state level and at our county level. I'm going to send this out. I know this is really small, but this is the playbook that the resident in Wilburn Acres created after he spent so much time. This is part of the playbook. Spent so much time working with DOT to come up with a better plan for his neighborhood. So we're not going to go through it, but I just wanted to show it to you and say I'm going to forward it. Then I wanted to highlight a specific example going on now in terms of tree laws. So this came to my attention, basically working backwards through some Purple Line construction and the construction of Jean Lynch Urban Park. And what I had noticed was that there were all these empty tree boxes at the Silver Spring Transit Center. And so I wanted to know what had happened there. And I looked back, and sure enough, there was a forest conservation plan associated with this location. And what the plan said is that at the time of construction, that they needed to provide 0.84 acres of afforestation, meaning there had not been canopy. There had been some canopy there originally, but in this particular location, they needed to add some canopy. And it said that it showed the specific trees that needed to be planted, and that they calculated what the canopy would be at 20 years growth. So here we are, and I'm like, oh, it's almost 20 years, 20 years later, almost. There's not going to be any canopy there because these trees have been allowed to die or have been removed and never replanted. And so we already know that downtown Silver Spring does not have what's considered to be a healthy urban tree canopy. And so here was one area that could be potentially improved upon. The problem is there hasn't been any successful enforcement at this location. And so there hasn't been any tree canopy added. And so with all of these laws only work if there is successful enforcement of them. And oftentimes it takes citizens looking and figuring out that something is not right, something looks wrong, or questioning or advocating for improvements to areas where they see the need for more tree canopy. And so I just wanted to sort of highlight this as one example. And hopefully in the future, we'll be able to say that there was some enforcement and that whether the trees are replanted here or nearby, but at least that the forest conservation plan was followed or mitigated for. But right now, that's not the case. Just going back, highlighting some of the county's free tree planting programs, which include DOT, Tree Montgomery, Relief the Reserve, which is in the Ag Reserve, and then Reforest Montgomery. These are just some pictures from our Home Tree Care 101 class, just giving you an idea of what happens during those classes, where you can really learn a lot about tree identification, basic home tree care in terms of pruning, in terms of when to call a licensed arborist, like I said, and any questions you have. And that's the presentation, but I figured there would definitely be some questions.
I have a question.
Okay, hang on a second. Who has their hand up?
Diana.
Diana, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, it's Diana Conway, a big fan of Amanda Farber. We've met a couple times. So the question, well, multiple questions, but the two that come to mind just based on the final parts of your presentation are who's supposed to be enforcing and who's supposed to be telling the enforcer to enforce, because that's always the backup. And the second question is, are any of the tree treatment companies being taught not to chokehold the saplings so that they make, I guess it's with the weed whacker, but sometimes it's with the mower, they make those rings of death around the base, and between that and the buck rubs, the trees have no chance. And then thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks for being on. So in terms of enforcement, it very much depends, again, on the location and the situation. So it could be Montgomery planning, if it is like in this case, the case of the Silver Spring Transit Center and the forest conservation law violation, that is Montgomery planning. In a lot of cases where there is an active construction, active site plan, that's going to be DPS, Department of Permitting Services. They are responsible for making sure the site plans are followed, and that includes, tree protection plans and tree planting according to those plans. It could also be DOT, just sort of reviewing where trees are getting planted and coming out and assisting. In examples like that, I've seen DOT plant trees and then tree protection has been ignored during construction or moved, and then that requires a call to DPS, and then eventually we've had situations where either the builder has to replant, or because of certain circumstances, DOT has to come back out and replant. So it's dependent on the situation and the location. But there's a good place to start can always be DPS or planning.
Okay, Chris Reynolds asks, is the issue at the Silver Spring Transit Center a state-county conflict issue?
It's a WMATA.
Okay.
WMATA's the property owner, but Montgomery Planning would be the Forest Conservation Plan enforcer.
And who at planning should people write to about the Silver Spring Transit Center?
I don't know if someone specific at planning wants me to call them out, but I will pass along some information about reporting in general. How about that?
Okay.
Is that good? Okay.
Paul Jarosinski, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we have to look very closely at a lot of things the county is doing. There was a proposal for a Bowie Mill Bikeway, which was 3.3 miles, and they said it would be very little disturbance. Well, when you actually read the fine print, they removed 1.48 acres of forest for a 3.3-mile bikeway. And their proposal was to replant the trees in the Damascus snow forest, if anybody knows where that is. And we objected to that plan because we pointed out that the county is removing down county trees and planting all the trees in Damascus. And that really doesn't help 3/4 of the county because we're losing forest. We also pointed out that our forests are dying for reasons that you alluded to. We have open space forest in Cherrywood, and the trees are just dying, and there's nothing growing to replace it because the deer eat it all. And we asked them if they couldn't replace the trees and in fact, we cooperated with other local HOAs who had the same problem and asked if they couldn't plant the trees in the same area where they were removing them for obvious reasons. And they declined to do that. They said that would slow the process down too much. And they referred us to Tree Montgomery. Tree Montgomery came in and they planted 4 trees in our 7-acre forest, which is a drop in the bucket, around the perimeter of that forest because all Tree Montgomery plants is shade trees. And shade trees don't grow in the forest. And so one of the steep problems that we have is we have these areas that were left as open space greenery, but they're fading away. And there doesn't seem to be a county program to do that. In fact, I was informed that all the tree replacement that developers need to do is almost always in the Damascus snow forest, which doesn't do the down county folks any good. And the last comment I wanted to make that I got from Tree Montgomery is in regard to the down county redevelopment of properties. You talk about the tree that's replaced and having to replace that one locally. But what they point out is when you disturb the ground to do these redevelopments, you kill all the mature trees or many of the mature trees in the area that die within the next 4 or 5 years. And there's no plan for any of that to make people replace those trees that perish because of their root system being disrupted.
That's a great point, which is right. Roots don't know property lines. And so there can be impacts to neighboring trees or trees on the property line during this construction. And oftentimes, there's other requirements during rebuilds where you might have dry wells, you might be taking up more of the space, and there just simply isn't quite as much room to replant all the trees on a property. But what you also said is that, I mean, you started off by saying citizens really have to be, on top of this. And that's so true. It's not just, look, there's a lot of reasons why trees have to come down and have to be removed. But what's important is fighting for the trees that can be preserved and protected, and also replanting as much as possible. And that replanting really takes a lot of advocacy. And replanting, like you said, in the location where trees are being lost is even more critical, because that does happen. Trees are replanted in other locations as mitigation. That was definitely one of the issues with the Purple Line project, is they utilized forest banks very far from the project in order to meet their mitigation requirements. And so it happens a lot. One of the amendments to the forest conservation law, which we pushed for, which planning agreed with, was to tweak the calculation so that there was more mitigation required if you were not doing it in the same watershed, if you were not replanting in the same watershed, because that's what we were finding is not only was it not in the same neighborhood necessarily, but trees were not necessarily being replanted in the same watershed even. So.
Jerry Garson, go ahead.
Do we have too many dead trees on the ground in Cabin John Regional Park, which in case of droughts, which we're currently having, could lead to a large forest fire, which would destroy the entire Cabin John Regional Park forest?
Do we? I don't have the answer to that. I think that would have to be a question for parks.
I've tried to ask the question and I just never respond because a large forest fire would just destroy their entire park.
Who have you contacted at parks?
Various people at different times, and they all just ignore any comment. I think that maybe they are looking for a forest fire.
Okay, Jonathan Bernstein.
What?
So really the same thing?
No, this is tonight's meeting.
Hey, Peggy, Dennis, you're not muted.
Jerry, I would like to know the answer.
Linda, why don't you go ahead? Jeff Griffith, go ahead.
You mentioned the fees that were paid in lieu for a certain number of trees. Do we know how many of those trees for which fees were paid were in fact actually replanted?
Yes, we do. It is in the Tree Montgomery report.
I mean, are we looking at 50%, 100%, 75%?
So they were running a little bit behind, but they are actively trying to get trees in the ground to cover the money that's being put into the fund. But like I said, for a while there, they were not, the fee was not keeping pace with the cost of the tree. So, right? So when you do that math, but they do have it. Hold on, and I have it on my screen. Let me share again here. Let me see on this slide. So I'm going to send out the full report, but you can see in the trees planted by applicants and fee payments by area of disturbance, you can see the all the fee payments coming in. And then there is another, there's some more in the report about the number of trees getting planted. So it is, they do have that answer.
Yes, we do want to know in that next to the last column, trees for which fees were paid. We want to know how many trees were actually planted,
Yes.
and whether we need to do something legislatively about the percentages, maybe increase the percentage, maybe 2 for 1 or whatever, just to throw out an idea, because we need, and where they should go. As you were suggesting earlier, and the gentleman from Cherrywood was suggesting, they need to go in places where trees are in fact being removed.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Okay.
Keep in mind, let me just say, keep in mind, the tree canopy law doesn't necessarily, you don't know for sure where trees are being removed because it doesn't account for that. It only accounts for the size of the sediment control permit. That's the trigger, not any trees on the property. So there could be all the trees on the property or no trees on the property. And it just depends on the size of the sediment control permit about how many trees are required. So it's a little bit hard to keep track exactly, but we know from other data, just looking at these tree canopy percentages in general and tree loss in different areas of the county, that, you know, where we are losing trees. And we all look around and see it every day, right? Too.
Jonathan Bernstein.
Amanda, thanks so much for this, and thanks for everything else you do. So I want to get hyper-local. Across from us, we had a wonderful neighbor, but she couldn't keep her house up, and she moved to senior housing. And a developer bought the house. And the first thing they did was cut down all the street trees. These weren't canopy trees. These were beautiful red buds, about 5 or 6 years old, that really framed the house in a lovely way, and they were done. But someone told us they were fined, the fellow who bought the house, that they were fined $10,000 for removing the street trees. So was that under the street tree law, or how would that happen?
I wouldn't know about that example because, yeah, I would be curious actually to look into that. Normally you have to have a permit in order to take down the street trees. I have never heard of a fine of that amount. Karen, have you?
I haven't, but I was just gonna verify what you were saying. I mean, if it was very illegal, and no wonder they got a fine of any size. If they didn't get a permit to take down right-of-way trees, those are not their trees to take down without, DOT permission.
I have a follow-up to that, and that is, so is it within our bailiwick, and who would we ask if we want them to replant trees? But the red buds, of course, are not canopy trees. They're beautiful, in their own. But what we'd most like is a mixture of the low trees like those with canopy trees, with the river, the whatever the particular kind of oak that the county recommends now. So who do we ask for that?
So a couple things. One, DOT will only plant minor trees under places where there's power lines, and it's supposed to only plant major trees, shade trees, in right-of-ways where there's no power lines. Occasionally you run into a situation where for another reason you might need a minor tree in a location even though there's not power lines. Maybe it's a particularly narrow green strip or a different utility consideration. But for the most part, that is their rule. And so it really depends on that. Secondly, the county requires, even though it's county public right-of-way, and for example, in DC, they consider it a public benefit to have trees in the right-of-way. In Montgomery County, you need the adjacent property owner's permission to plant trees in the right-of-way. And so if that neighbor is amenable to requesting new trees, then that would go through DOT. One thing DOT appreciates is if neighborhoods can get together and help organize and spread the word about their tree planting programs. Contact them first and, tell them that you're interested in doing that. And then signing up neighbors who would like to have their right-of-ways evaluated, and putting all that information into one spreadsheet, which makes it just a lot easier and more efficient for them to go through. But that's what I'd say. The neighbor needs to be on board, and DOT would do the planting.
So if I'm across the street, does that count?
I know you can be the ambassador to encourage them. I know what that's like. There's places that I would love to see some trees planted, but if you're not the adjacent property owner, then it's tough. But there's a lot of places in various neighborhoods where there might not be an adjacent property owner, where it might be a little bit more sort of open communal space.
Well, I guess this is really helpful because the first thing I'll do in the light of tomorrow is have a look where the power lines are. And she had, I think, 4 of these red buds planted along the front. So the right of way is pretty generous there. It must be. And then to approach the neighbor, it's interesting that there's a fellow that I've befriended who I think works for the developer or works for the realtor. I don't know how all this is set up, who apparently wasn't involved in what happened. And I told him he should have been talking with me sooner. But anyway, thank you very much for your guidance about this. I really appreciate it. Oh, and actually, the last thing I wonder, do you think we have any chance of telling MTA that if they're building a mezzanine at the transit center to get people to the red line, and they're building a purple line stop at the transit center, how expensive would it be to plant a couple of trees on that plaza at the top where they should have done it but didn't do it?
Yeah, so WMATA has the transit center, and then MTA is building it. So that's 2 different entities. But that is an area where there can definitely be advocacy because okay, I'm going to share one more time. I'm just going to show folks this.
Yeah, and I will mute myself. And again, thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I don't know if folks can see this photo. Can you see my mouse by any chance moving on the screen?
Yes. We can
Okay.
see it.
Do you see this tree right here? The one remaining tree right here in this area. So that was a tree that actually you can see it here too, right? So here it was marked on the Forest Conservation Plan. It was supposed to be part of it. There used to be 2 other trees here that were part of the original Forest Conservation Plan. They are also now no longer there. But this tree, MTA was using it, and Purple Line Partners were using it basically to just, they were storing a lot of vehicles and supplies and trash. There was 0 tree protection. The roots were just getting crushed. And I did say, why is there no tree protection? Why would you not protect this tree? Like the one remaining canopy tree in the area, providing a little bit of shade. And they did come in and put in some minimal tree protection fencing. I'm hoping that tree survives. But this whole area, there's not a whole lot of trees that are going to be replanted here. So this is definitely, it's nice that they planted trees across the street near the Gene Lynch Urban Park, which finally got completed. But this is an area that could definitely use some advocacy. So,
okay, Sheldon Fishman.
Amanda, thank you for your presentation, and I look forward to the materials that you're going to be sending us. So, I have a local issue as well. There's Georgia Avenue is across the street from Forest Grove Metro stop and right down a block from the Beltway. And there's a half-acre forest on Georgia Avenue, and next to a building, a medical center that's going to be redeveloped. And the developer wants to expand the footprint and tear and rip out every single tree in the forest. And it turns out that the planning department is not helping us to enforce it. In fact, Friends of Sligo Creek is suing the planning department to comply with the site plan to maintain as much of the forest on Georgia Avenue as they can and reduce the footprint of the redevelopment. Is that you mentioned that we should look to the planning department for help on forest. In this case, we're suing those people who are supposed to be helping us. Is that is that a general problem in the county or is it just me?
It's not just you. First of all, Sheldon, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for you've been sending me wonderful well wishes and cards, and I really appreciate it. But so I'm very familiar with that location, and there were a number of issues with that, starting with the original sector plan language and onto the natural resources inventory, where they had to account for the different trees on the site, which wasn't necessarily accurate, to another issue that happened at that location is the property owner basically allowed for the degradation of that forest over time. So invasives were very present there, and it made it, and then the definition of forest came into play of how is it defined in the law? There's a very specific definition, and how was that going to be applied to that location? And clearly there were some pretty strong differences of opinion. I know also with that, there was issues with the mitigation that was being counted initially, in terms of trees being replanted on site. And so there was a whole swirl of issues related to that particular property. I know there were one solution that was proposed at one point had been to save and enhance more of that existing forest and allow for the developer to potentially build up another story or two, or to sort of reconfigure things to allow for some additional preservation. But you probably know more than I do at this point about where things stand with that particular site and the lawsuit. So
can I ask a
Well,
follow-up?
I can just fill in a couple of facts. Is that the Friends of Cycle Creek sued them. The initial judge said, "Well, I don't know anything about forestry, but the planning department does." Said that they looked at the site plan and they complied with a lot of stuff in the site plan, so I guess it's okay. And and then it went to the appeals court, and the appeals court said more or less the same thing, that, well, the planning department are experts, and they looked at the site plan and did a lot of, implemented a bunch of stuff in the site plan, so they must know what they're doing. And it's now at the state court.
Oh, it's now at the state court. Okay. Yeah. So thank you for that update, and thank you for just, letting people know about that example. It is a example where, like I said, there was a whole swirl of issues happening. And I'll be interested to hear what decisions are made during the
And
next steps. But there's
some other legalistic issues that like standing, but I'm not even going to talk about them.
Okay. There is a constant battle between development, particularly down county or transit-oriented development, and existing forests and the mitigation required. And so this does play out all over the county. And we, of course, want there to be concentrated development in some locations if it means the preservation of forest in others. But what you saw from the University of Maryland report that had come out is that even with transit-oriented development, a focus on that, we are still losing a lot of forest to development throughout the county. And it's when you see sort of forests that are, that are down county and near transit oriented development, what we're seeing a lot of is just continued fracturing of them. I call it slicing and dicing the remaining forest that's left. So.
Okay, Joyce Squads and then Liz Joyce. Go ahead, Joyce Squads. Liz Joyce, you go ahead then.
With it. My question is on sidewalks. My experience with sidewalks is that I guess it was DOT who did one on our street. They just come through and they literally went along the path where the sidewalk was going to go and knocked out said they were going to take down every tree. Is there some way, and with the purple line coming through, a number of the neighborhoods affected by the purple line, which include residential, are on there, I believe, to get new sidewalks. Sidewalks put in. Is there some way to require that, the trees be taken into account when they come up with a plan? I mean, the end result 25 years ago or so, when one went on my street, was they took down maybe 3 trees instead of, an entire street of trees, which seemed a waste of time and really pretty counterproductive on all sides. But yeah. I wonder if it's better to have them all shown to go down so that you could actually make your case that this was a really poor plan. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So yes, no, absolutely. It's a requirement. Tree protection is supposed to be like the #1 requirement when they come through and do sidewalk or road work plan. And yeah, even like in the downtown Bethesda streetscape plan, it literally has the language saying like trees are one of the most important parts of the streetscape, right? And so, but we don't always see that play out. And so that's what has happened in a number of neighborhoods, and including this Willerburn Acres neighborhood recently, where it really took residents like going through the plans in detail and being able to point out to DOT where it did not make sense. It costs a lot of money to take down trees, for one. 2, now you have to pay a higher fee back into it. And by the way, DOT also has to pay that fee even when they're the ones taking out the tree. Okay. And so, and there's alternatives that can be done. They don't always like to use them, but they, they have to follow the code, but there's ways to like, okay, maybe you make it a little bit narrower in one location. Maybe you consider putting it on the other side of the block. Maybe you consider putting it in a little bit more. Like, sometimes the straight line might be the easiest, especially in terms of a sidewalk, but maybe allowing for some more flexibility will both save trees and actually save some money. So it's project by project, and it's requesting all the documentation, right? Requesting those plans and being able to sort of comb through them, and then staying on top of them while they're doing it. And it's unfortunate, but oftentimes it takes escalating and pulling in elected officials, or trying to at least.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fair amount of work, which seemed so unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or that it shouldn't have been necessary anyway.
Yeah. When the resident developed his playbook for the sidewalks, I mean, I showed it up briefly on the screen. My big takeaway of looking at it is like, it's a lot of work, right? That playbook is, it can mean hours and hours and hours of organizing and communicating and advocating. He'll tell you it was worth it for the outcome, and that, DOT said that they would really focus on repeating that outcome in other neighborhoods, but you never know unless you're staying on top of it.
That would be encouraging. I mean, one of the arguments they used for our street for taking them all down was that putting in a sidewalk was going to kill them anyway. And that didn't happen. I didn't notice it happening. I still have 3 trees in front of my house.
Yeah.
And maybe a couple years ago, which is 20 plus years after the sidewalk went in, one of the trees came down, but that could be a whole host of things out over 20 years. But they really didn't want to make an effort to save them.
Yeah, and it's true. Sometimes sidewalk construction can.
I get that, but
yeah, if it's impacting the critical root zone, it can definitely cause damage that might not show up right away, but over time. But
our argument was, let's find out.
But you could find out, and you could also. I also think it's just super important that if the trees are going to come down, that residents demand that there be a replanting plan in place prior to that, so that there is that guarantee that it's going to happen back in the same location.
Amanda, I know you know that Kathleen Sammy's done a lot of work on this.
Oh, she has done a ton of work.
And one of the issues she raised is that the tree boxes that they build for the streets won't support big canopy trees. We have to actually do more than get trees planted, but to get them to do the boxes.
Yeah, to have enough soil volume for the shade trees. Yeah, absolutely. And not just enough soil volume, but enough growing space. Joyce will know this. In Bethesda, they were designing buildings that had decent sized sidewalks and tree boxes, but then they were cantilevering the buildings out over the sidewalks and over where these trees would be able to grow in the future. And so that was problematic.
Yeah. Liz Joyce, go ahead. No, you're muted, Liz.
Yes, segueing on what you're talking about, I was listening to the planning board discussion last week about the proposed University Boulevard corridor plan, and one of their most significant ideas is that they will reduce the setbacks from 30 feet, which is now required, to 10 feet. And they think it's a great idea that the houses will be basically almost right up to the street, because in their view, this will reduce the speed of vehicles, and the closeness will create less traffic and chaos than there is now, which I found a really interesting idea. But my question is, how would this kind of proposal affect the trees? And what can, I don't even know if that's become part of the argument for people who are objecting vociferously to that plan, but they're from that meeting, they seem to be planning to barge right ahead and assuming that anyone who has any concerns is absolutely off base. And this is only one of the issues that is undoubtedly going to come up.
With the attainable
setback.
No, with the University Boulevard corridor plan.
Oh, the corridor plan.
The setback is just 10 feet.
10 feet.
Denser housing. And I think Mitra raised some objections that had to do with fumes and gasoline and the unpleasantness of living that close to the street. And that's when planning responded that the appearance of an area getting much more dense, according to planning studies, makes cars slow down.
Right. That's the rationale, which I found fascinating. But the whole picture, the whole context seems to be missing. And this is just one of the many issues that don't seem to be part of their calculus.
If any place needs more tree canopy, it's the University Boulevard corridor area. And one of the things we've looked at, and Cheryl, you talked about Kathleen, but putting tree canopy goals into sector plans and master plans. The problem is you have to have planning has to be willing to measure that, and then they have to have a plan to actually increase the tree canopy to reach that goal in those areas. And relying on these laws, even though they do offer, some protection, like we talked about, in some replanting, they're not enough to reach the goals that we want for areas like
downtown Silver Spring.
University, like downtown Silver Spring, like University Corridor.
Right. Okay, John Holden, go ahead.
Hi there, thanks. Related to that, with the University Boulevard corridor plan, in a presentation that the planning staff made to the county council on September 9th, they claimed that that this University Boulevard corridor plan was about, quote, expanding the tree canopy and, quote, designing University Boulevard as a cool corridor with green infrastructure. But apparently the planning department completely failed to read an August 4 memo from the county's Department of Environmental Protection, which said, and I quote, increasing allowed density and intensity of development along University Boulevard corridor will almost certainly result in a decrease in tree canopy and an increase in impervious surfaces. Both results will contribute to an increased heat island effect, which is detrimental to human health and aquatic and other biological resources. And it went on and on. And I found it ridiculous, the suggestion that reducing the front setbacks for this more dense housing on University Boulevard was the only way to generate greater pedestrian safety to be really. There are many ways to accomplish greater pedestrian safety on that road. And so I just wanted to make that point. And I can't trust anything that the planning department presents to the county council when they completely ignore the county's own Department of Environmental Protection, one of the few when they did do this analysis. Thanks. It's less of a question, it's more of a comment. Of course, I'm interested in any comments or thoughts you have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. And yeah, you're right. So there are these initiatives like the cool streets, like the complete streets that are supposed to increase tree canopy, but then you have some competing interests, right? Or questionable tactics of how that's going to actually happen, or unrealistic goal. And of course, there you also have the issue of state roads, right? And the state being part of the decision maker for what happens there. And so, no, I think you're right. Like there has to be a more specific plan, and there has to be space built in for these trees. If you look at the guidelines in the Complete Streets guidelines, they call for a decent amount of space to be allowed for street trees to grow, for trees in the median. And so that would be another tool maybe to if you can use the county's own words and initiatives to sort of question other ones, then I think that can be helpful. Are you familiar with the Complete Streets guidelines?
I don't know. We might have lost John.
I don't know. I'll put that into the resources too.
I'm not super familiar with it.
As just something to look at, because it defines exactly what how much space would be the minimum required for different kinds of roads.
So Ann Vorsey has a comment here. The state million trees people, MDOT and DNR, are looking for planting opportunities. Why isn't this a real possibility for the University Boulevard corridor?
That I do not know the answer to that question. It's probably a matter of finding the space.
Yeah.
and having the property owners be agreeable.
Right. Somebody has to organize that, I guess.
Mhm.
Okay, last chance for questions.
It's a good question, Anne.
Okay, I'm sorry, there's so much in the chat box, but oh, Jeff Griffith, you raised your hand again. Go ahead.
Sorry, just real quick and very local. I have a magnificent 50 or 60-foot red oak tree in the county right away in front of my house. And I'm very afraid that some government entity is going to come along and say, sorry, Mr. Griffith, that's going to have to go. And I just need to know how much advance notice I'll have and what kind of appeal process I'll have to go through. I assume they have to notify me. Other than chaining myself to the tree, what can I do that would be reasonable to bring to protect that magnificent thing?
Well, it depends the reason why they would come through. To where are you located? What's the concern about why they would come through to want to
Well,
take it down?
the WSSC is doing a major rehaul on the revamping of the water lines. Fortunately, I escaped this one.
Okay.
Others were not as fortunate. So what happens if my tree had gotten, I haven't given it a name, but I will. What happens if I get on that list?
Yeah, utilities like WSSC, that's tough. And they are required, I will say, they are required to do a tree protection plan. Recently, though, we caught them over in Battery Park going through, they had not done any tree protection that was required. They had just started on the project. And so again, sometimes it takes somebody noticing, but it sounds like you're aware, you're looking out for it. I would, if it's in the DOT right of way, I would make sure that DOT is keeping up with maintaining it, right? If it needs any pruning or anything like that, just so that it stays healthy, right? But you may find yourself having to go to battle someday. And it might mean bringing in an independent arborist to do a consultation and to help with that battle for you. I'll provide resources on that as well.
That's all just fine. I just need to know if under the current procedures, I would get enough advance notice to actually implement an appeal.
You have to be on the lookout for whatever project is going to be coming through, whether it's WSSC, I mean, potentially Pepco, or if you have power lines nearby, a sidewalk project, whatever it is, you have to sort of be on the lookout.
All right. That's very helpful. I appreciate it.
I will say I'm a little bit pessimistic about that because in our neighborhood, with the restoration of the Capitol Crescent Trail, because of the Purple Line construction, WSSC decided while they were tearing everything up, they were going to rerun the sewer lines, and they identified a tree to take down. I think, Amanda, I talked to you at the time. It wasn't on the initial plan to come down, and then the people who lived in the house realized they were going to take down this beautiful tree. So they objected. They brought their own arborist in. For the DC's arborist said that the tree could be saved, and they just refused. And all they did was advance the date of taking it down so that it was like a matter of days and nothing could be done. I know we got Evan Glass involved, and he wasn't even able to stop them. And all they did was go and get the tree put on the state plan and then immediately take it down. And that was the argument. Like the residents in that house really wanted the tree, and they said, why can't you just wait to see if it dies? Why do we have to decide it? And they just said it's going to die, and so it's coming down, and they took it down. It was really quite sad.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do remember that, Cheryl. So yeah, it's especially, I mean, WSSC, like I said, we caught them doing none of the tree protection that was required. So it is just like being on top of them.
Yeah.
But it's
Dan Mayer, go ahead.
I wondered if you could address the damage or potential damage that the invasion of the spotted lantern, like what do they call it, fly or something?
Yes, fly.
And they have a tendency to attack a certain type of tree. But I happen to have a property in Pennsylvania where they've done a lot of damage to that effect. And so I'm sorry to see that they've, invaded here. And well, anyway.
Yeah, I am not an expert on the spotted lanternfly. So I can't speak exactly to that. I see them as well.
They lay their eggs. They lay their eggs in a certain type of tree. I've forgotten which one.
And where I have seen the most of them, for some reason, they absolutely love the Marriott, the brand new Marriott headquarters. They love the building itself. They've all been congregating there. But I cannot speak. I would want an expert on that to speak to that question. Unless Karen, do you want to try? Do you have anything specific?
No, we're losing a tree in our local park because it was infested with spotted lanternflies, and I've become an expert in killing them. So it's like one of those bugs that you should not feel bad about killing. Yeah. So, but again, I'm not an expert on it.
Alrighty, well, we are
mixed things. Like I've just heard mixed things from different sources about how long they're going to stick around, whether this is something that we're going to be looking at for truly years to come as being a pest or not. So I'm not an expert.
Liz Joyce, go ahead. You're muted.
Hilariously enough, every time I've been up to the planning board in the last 2 months, it is the outdoor patio has been covered with spotted lanternflies. I have no comment on the significance of this, but it is absolutely a phenomenon.
All right, I think we are out of time for this. I want to say thank you to Amanda and Karen Madsen. We so appreciate what you've done here tonight, and we also very much appreciate Conservation Montgomery for the work that you do around the county. And I will let everyone on the call know that Conservation Montgomery, if you don't know, is also a member of the Civic Federation, and that is a membership in an alliance that we really appreciate. Karen, is your hand up to speak?
Yeah, something real quick here. We're having our annual meeting on November 7th. It's a great networking opportunity if you want to come mix and mingle with other environmentally minded people in the county. If you're interested, I'll send Alan and Cheryl a copy of the note on it, and you guys can sign up and come.
Okay.
We have to start with a reception. And the other thing real quick is that we have a November 15th date available for Home Tree Care 101 class. And if you're interested in taking that date, let me know.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you both so very much.
And I just want to say, I know there were a lot of questions in the chat and we didn't get to all of them. So Alan or Cheryl, if you could save the chat, and I will go through and respond to some of those questions and give them to you to pass along.
Okay.
I'd appreciate that.
All right. I think we can do that. Okay.
Great job, Amanda.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yes. Thank you to both of you and Conservation Montgomery. Okay, we're going to move on to announcements. Jerry Garson has a very brief announcement on tax assessments. Go ahead, Jerry.
The county has probably completed their tax assessments as of September 30th, but the people in Area 2, which had their assessment effective January 1, 2023, will be reassessed as of January 1st, 2026. But I'm going to tell anyone, look at the property sales that have occurred after September 30th and through December 31st if you want to appeal your property assessments. We know that a lot of because of what's happened with the federal government, a lot of properties are selling at more distressed prices. So just bear it in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We're going to move on quickly now to old business. I would like to do an update on the University Boulevard corridor plan, which is something everyone should be interested in because it's only the start of a list of corridor projects. The PHP committee met on September 29th about the University Boulevard plan. The committee agreed to recommend the removal of the Kent Mill Shopping Center from the plan, as well as Yeshiva Greater Washington, a religious school, and the Kent Mill Urban Park from the boundaries of the plan. It was confirmed during the presentation that the CRN zone would have the effect of wiping out the rules that were just established under ZTA 2502 or More Housing Now, and also eliminate the workforce housing requirements of that legislation. Councilmember Mink sent a memo to colleagues in advance of the PHP session outlining 5 suggested amendments, including lowering building heights, prioritizing near-term pedestrian improvements, eliminating the zoning changes to single-family properties, and maintaining the current number of general traffic lanes through the Four Corners intersections. She also attended the PHP session where only the single-family zoning question has been discussed for one neighborhood so far. On that question, Council Vice President Jawando supported Councilmember Mink's position. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez supported the plan's language as passed by the planning board, and Councilmember Friedson supported a compromise position to rezone only the properties on the corridor. Related to transportation matters, there was a presentation and discussion by Corey Pitts of MCDOT. He noted there are 8 BRT corridors from his slide, and no funding has been programmed for planning and or design of a BRT along the University Boulevard at this time. And that is, as you recall from a lot of testimony, including the Civic Feds, the plan is built on having a BRT, except the BRT will not exist within the 20-year timeline of this plan. Of course, Pitts also stated that no outreach has been done along University Boulevard. It is not one of the BRT corridors with active stages. Much of the discussion was on aspirational goals of improving pedestrian safety and traffic with no provisions for funding or staging those infrastructure changes to accomplish the goals. It was clarified that ADUs will be allowed along with non-residential uses on the rezoned lots. Prohibited would be gas stations, car washes, auto repair, drive-throughs, self-storage facilities, and a few other things. The PH committee has scheduled subsequent work sessions for October 20th and November 3rd. The full council will have a hearing on October 28th. The hearing is going to be on the ZTA that would implement the zoning changes called for in the UBC plan. This might be confusing because there were 2 hearings in September on the corridor master plan overall, but the hearing on the 28th is on the ZTA that would make the zoning changes that are called for under the University Boulevard plan. To sign up to testify, please go to the council website and sign up by noon on the 27th. But if you really want to be heard, don't wait that long. Often on things where there's a lot of public opinion, the slots fill up and then there's a waiting list. So I don't want you to end up frustrated. If you really want to testify, you can go online and sign up, right now. It's unclear right now how people are going to testify before the PHP committee has finished its work on the proposal. But nevertheless, don't wait for that. Sign up to testify if that's important to you. The October 10th Bethesda Today article leads with Planning Chair Artie Harris dismissing the many substantive objections to the plan by saying, quote, change is hard, end quote, and that he hopes to lessen opposition with education of residents. It's problematic, I think, to describe opposition as emotional or uneducated. And Harris went on to say they're doing what is best for the neighborhoods, which is patronizing and suggests that residents of the neighborhoods don't know what's best for them. Also, as Joyce Gwads pointed out today, it suggests that planning's attitude is that their job is to change people's minds, not to listen and respond to resident concerns. And at this point, do we have delegates from affected neighborhoods around University Boulevard that want to add anything to this update or discussion?
Hi, Cheryl. This is Harriet.
Hey, Harriet.
Hi. So I do live in one of the Four Corners neighborhoods that would be affected, that's adjacent to University Boulevard. You did an excellent summary. I did want to clarify the upcoming hearing on the 28th about the ZTA is on the specific overlay zone that would make specific changes to the CRN zone for these University Boulevard properties. It would only affect the CRN properties, not the other properties that are being upzoned to CRT or are currently CRT, but they're increasing the density. So I just wanted to clarify that because they're going to designate what types of uses could be done on those CRN properties.
Can you explain a little bit the difference between the CRN properties and the CRT?
Sure. So the CRN is the commercial residential neighborhood zone. It was created for commercial properties that are adjacent to residential neighborhoods. So there are quite a few shopping centers around the county that are CRN. There are a lot of retail uses that are allowed under the CRN zone. But it is a small, it's intended for lower density than the commercial residential town zone, which is more, I guess you would say, mid-rise density. I don't know the height limit specifically for the general zone, but for these properties, it would be 50 feet. And really the ZTA is intended to specify which current uses in the CRN zone would not be allowed under this University Boulevard plan for these particular properties, which are both on the corridor and behind the properties that are on the corridor. So some of them go into the neighborhoods a couple of blocks. The CRT zone, is, I would say most of the shopping centers around the county that are, mostly just commercial right now, those are CRT. And then the regular CR zone is for much higher density. But they're all mixed use zones, can be commercial and residential on the property.
So the single family homes, that we've expressed a lot of concern about being upzoned, are those all CRN? Are going into the CRN bucket?
They would
Yes, they're all being upzoned from R60. They're being upzoned from R60 and R90 to CRN.
Okay.
And then there are a number of religious institutional properties that are currently, zoned R60, that would be upzoned to CRT. They are also on the corridor, but they are adjacent to single family homes.
So the religious institutions that are going to be upzoned to CRT, how high can the buildings go there?
70 feet under the University Boulevard plan.
So that's interesting because the faith-based ZTA limited religious institutions that develop their property to 60 feet.
Yeah. And under the ZTA for the religious institutions, they would remain R60 or R90, and they would not have all these other commercial uses that are available under the commercial residential zones. So that's a huge change, is the uses that are allowed under CRT versus, the regular R60 zone that allows for other residential building types. So this would allow a religious institution property to convert to, say, a big shopping center that's also has, 6 more stories of residential. And as I said, most of them are adjacent to single family homes. So I just wanted to specify that the ZTA, the overlay zone, is specifically about the CRN properties, not the CRT properties. They're not changing anything about the CRT zone, what's allowed in the CRT zone for those properties that they're converting from R60 to CRT. That's not included.
They're just changing the use table in CRT?
No, they're not changing anything about CRT. What I'm saying is this overlay zone only addresses the CRN properties, which are the single family homes.
Okay.
There's no protection for the other properties that are being upzoned from R60 to CRT.
What do you mean by there's no protection for R60 to CRT?
Well, so that the overlay zone is reducing the number of uses allowed, the types of uses allowed in the CRN zone, specifically for the University Boulevard properties.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
And they're not reducing any uses for the properties that are being upzoned from R60 to CRT, which specifically are the institutional properties.
Right.
Okay. Hope that makes sense. I know it's confusing, but
no. I understand now, but
it doesn't really implement the zoning per se. That will come when they do the sectional map amendment after the master plan, the Carter plan is adopted. That implements all the zoning. This just addresses the uses allowed under CRN in this particular plan.
Oh, I see. Only the uses. So I noticed that they said in the hearing announcement, you can't testify about anything outside of this. So going in there to testify about, like, for example, don't change the zoning of the R60 homes is not going to be allowed, right?
No, I think that's fine to do that. There are also some other, I don't know, I don't have it in front of me. There are some other development standards. I think that they are changing a little bit for the CRN zone for these properties, not in general, just for the University Boulevard properties. But I don't have it up in front of me, so I can.
You say they're sort of restricting what kinds of commercial things can go on in the CRN. That's like where they said no car washes and gas stations and stuff like that.
Correct. Right. Exactly.
You might have been able to do those someplace else in a CRN.
Right.
Okay. Do we have any questions?
Can I add another?
Yep, go ahead, John.
Another thing is that referring to the University Boulevard corridor plan generally, not this ZTA that Harriet was describing. The planning board made a number of changes, important changes, after their public hearing. So after we'd already had an opportunity to provide input. For example, they, with respect to the CRT zones, they increased the allowed heights up to 100 feet. So, for example, Woodmore Shopping Center, if and when it's redeveloped, buildings up to 100 feet would be allowed. Same applies in the Safeway and other commercial areas near my neighborhood of South Four Corners. Another change that they made was to suggest that the dedicated bus lanes go all the way through the Four Corners intersection, and when which would cause a great number of a great deal of problems with respect to additional congestion and the like. And the planning department gave the county council people a tour. They actually got on a bus and came to University Boulevard. And when they were describing this change to allow a dedicated bus lane through the Four Corners intersection, they admitted that they didn't have the time or the resources to study any of the impacts of that suggested change that they adopted at the request of the planning board, including left turns onto Colesville Road and so forth and so on. So there are a number of people who have been trying to tell the county council that they need to send this plan back to the planning department for some real impact analysis and some real community engagement because of the changes that they made after they'd gotten the input and because of the lack of a real impact analysis.
Yeah, I mean, that's been, we've had problems for a long time with, they have a hearing and then make changes and then you don't get another hearing. Same thing happens in the council. It's frustrating, and I think it comes from a basic place of not really giving a lot of respect to the input that you're getting. And I think a lot of these decision makers see it as a waste of time. Just they have to punch the card and get it over with.
I would add second Harriet's comment. I appreciate the summary that you gave. They did have the council had these two public hearings back earlier in September, the 10th and the 16th. But now the only way to provide input is to contact members of one of the best ways is members of the PHP committee, who include Andrew Friedson, Natalie Fanning Gonzalez, and Will Jawando. And eventually, of course, because what decisions that the committee makes are often adopted by the full council. Eventually, it'll go before the full council.
So where did PHP leave it if there were three different positions on the upzoning in CRN that Kristen Mink offered?
They just left it at a 1-1-1 vote. That's how they recorded it for that particular section of the plan.
That's another thing. Mink actually suggested that because they adopting the CRN zone along University Boulevard and off of University Boulevard, a block or so, would eliminate what they approved in ZTA 2502,
right?
Including forced housing requirement that was supposedly the justification for the ZTA 2502, and it would also reduce the setbacks, reduce the parking requirements that are in the ZTA 2502 that they just passed, and doesn't even take effect until next month. But they're already going to be changing. This plan would already be overriding the effects of ZTA 2502.
I did want to add one other thing, Cheryl, on the pedestrian safety aspects of the plan. There is already a plan with the State Highway Administration called the Maryland 193 Pedestrian Safety Action Plan. And of course, they're the ones who own the road and maintain it and can actually implement something. And they are having their next, and it's in design. So it should be finished by next year in terms of what the design is, which would be much faster than anything through the corridor plan. So, the planning board chair has tried to maintain that this plan is about pedestrian safety, but that's already underway. And the residents feel like we don't need this corridor plan that's premature because there's no BRT coming anytime soon to increase the safety for pedestrians and bicyclists along the corridor. So I just wanted to add that.
What about the argument that by putting it in the plan, it gives them a little leverage with the state to get it done?
I don't really think it gives them any more leverage than they already have, because they've been meeting with the planning staff and DOT about this pedestrian safety action plan. And in fact, it's the only one in Montgomery County that they're doing at the moment. They have 7 other around the state that they're doing. So I'm not, this statement that it's about pedestrian safety kind of came late after a lot of the opposition came up and they started saying, they had to do it because of pedestrian safety. But there's nothing they're proposing, I think, that the state is proposing that would require a change to the master plan, you know? It's really about right-of-way acquisition in some places and, you know, making wider sidewalks and green space.
Yeah. So while I'm thinking about it, if people could, send a note to Kristen Mink thanking her. She attended, she offered amendments. She's, planning to still persist with them, the full council, but it's hard to do for an individual council members to, go against the tide that way. So if you could send her a brief note thanking her for her efforts on the University Boulevard plan, whether you live in that area or not, in her district or not, just send her a note because we want to, try to keep our help when we get it. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about the University Boulevard plan? So instead of getting into a discussion about a legislative agenda plan, what I will tell you is that Liz Joyce and I have been preparing items that would reform of government items that would go on our agenda. I spent a lot of time today writing a memo, sort of summarizing where the history of the Office of the People's Council and what's happened over the years to that office, and that has been on the MCCF's legislative agenda for many years, and we will be making a renewed effort to get it funded and staffed, whether it's at the local level or the state level. So please watch your email. I'm going to send out these items. There'll be an item coming out on the Office of the People's Council. It'll be a little bit more lengthy than the others because there's a long history of it and a lot has happened, and people need to understand before they start lobbying on these issues exactly what has occurred. And then we have a number of other smaller items, some fairly simple things like a requirement that planning send a postcard and notify a homeowner if their property is being upzoned if they didn't request it. So, we tried to get planning to do that with More Housing Now. It was only 2,400 houses, could very easily that could have notified individual homeowners of that. They said no to that. We testified, last year when planning asked to be able to have meetings off-site, which they're now doing fairly regularly. There is a state law in the books that says if you have a meeting off-site, there's 19 state agencies that are allowed to do that, but they have to lock their agenda down 48 hours in advance, and they can't conduct official business. When planning asked to have the right to do off-site meetings, we advocated those positions along with some other groups, like the Sierra Club was very active on that. What the delegates did was give us the prohibition on conducting official business on these field trips, which they had to do because otherwise it would have violated the Open Meetings Act. But they have been resisting without ever explaining why, locking their agenda down for 48 hours in advance. And, a year or so ago, they changed the rules. So if you want to testify before the planning board, you have to ask 48 hours in advance. And something like 22 times out of the 37 times that they met in 2024, they changed the agenda within that 48-hour window when you're not entitled to testify. And so we have been trying to get them. No one's ever explained why planning can't live under the same law that 19 other state agencies are living under and lock their agenda down 48 hours in advance. And if they can't, then they should go back to their previous rule that you can ask to testify 24 hours before something comes up on the agenda. So we will be re-upping that as well. We have a number of other items that people have flagged for us. So I'll send out sort of the first tranche of them, and look them over. And if you have questions or objections or something, you say, I feel more strongly in favor of this item than others, or whatever, we can try to make sure that we have some time in November to finalize a legislative agenda. So, when I do send that out, if you can make some time to take a look at those items. Liz Joyce, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to add, I'm not sure we even discussed this. One of the planning board's arguments when I testified about this 48 hours thing was, well, they have so much information coming in, they need time to review it. But that is a ridiculous argument because people who submit their testimony in person do not have to submit it in writing in advance. So there's no reason that anyone who wants to testify in person must register 48 hours in advance, because they will not need to review testimony that has not been submitted in writing. So it was a real circuitous argument that made no sense. But they were all ready to reject that proposal.
Okay. All right. So we're going to expect you can expect to get some materials from us between now and the end of November on the legislative agenda. And that, I think, concludes our program for tonight. It is getting late. Does anyone else have anything under new business they want to bring up? Hearing nothing, we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is it seconded?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. It was a great program.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
Cheryl.